Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the HBTA presentation on the Supplemental Benefit Plan, Subplan as we more commonly know it. I'm Del Moylan. I'm one of the managers in the Plan Administrator for the HBTA, reporting to Gail Chervell. My team looks after contracts, communications, the benefit plan booklets. So we're going to talk about the subplan. We're going to talk about maternity leave a little bit. We're going to talk about the subplan. I'm going to give some history because that's always important and interesting. We'll talk about top-up amounts, duration. We've got a couple of examples. We're going to talk about benefit plan cost share. And there's room at the end for questions, but if anybody has a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask them. Okay, so we're going to talk about a maternity leave first. So a maternity leave actually is in two portions. There's a valid health-related period, which begins on the date that the employee delivers her baby. And then there's a voluntary portion of the leave, which is not related to the health-related period at all. So to explain further, if an employee works until her date of delivery, she will begin her maternity leave and her valid health-related period at the same time, which is her date of delivery. But once her valid health-related period is over, once she has recovered from the childbirth, then she goes on to the voluntary portion of the leave. A maternity leave might be split up into different kinds of leave. So if you have an employee, for example, who wishes to start her maternity leave early and she doesn't have a medical reason for doing that, she's going to have, and let's say she does that 1 month prior to the date she delivers, she's got 1 month of voluntary leave, then she's going to have her baby, she's got her valid health-related period, and then once that is over, then she goes back on her voluntary leave again. And we'll talk about this again, but during the valid health-related period, the cost share for benefit plan premiums continues or waived. We'll talk about that in a minute. And of course, as with any leave of absence for the voluntary part of the maternity leave, the employee can choose to continue or discontinue some or all benefits, and of course is responsible for 100% of the cost. What is a subplan? The intent is to talk about this subplan, but I'll just talk about subplans in general. So the purpose of a subplan is really to top up EI benefits during a period the employee is not working. And the total of the subplan top-up and the EI benefits can equal either 100% or 90% of regular earnings. So usually you'll find a top-up or a subplan in place when there's a temporary short stoppage of work, sometimes when people are going in training, and of course illness, injury, or quarantine. So really the purpose of our subplan is to top up EI maternity benefits during an employee's valid health-related period post-delivery. The subplan provides a top-up to EI maternity benefits only in this case. There are other subplans that top up to other types of benefits, but this one does not. EI maternity benefits and subplan top-up must be equivalent to the earnings that a person would normally be entitled to if they were away for another medical reason. Under this subplan, the top-up is paid during the valid health-related period only. And just to ensure that we all understand, the valid health-related period is the period the employee is recovering from delivery of her child. A subplan has to be employer-funded. And a subplan, even though when subplans first came into effect, and certainly when this subplan came into effect, it had to be registered with EI. Now, if the subplan is topping up to EI maternity, parental, or compassionate benefits, it does not have to be registered anymore. So the basic principles under this subplan, and because of all the history, which we'll get into here right away, is that the employee is treated substantially the same during the valid health-related period post-delivery as someone who is absent from work for a different medical reason. So for example, somebody who has a broken leg. So if you're not sure what you need to do with somebody because of the pregnancy, just pretend that they had a broken leg and you treat them substantially the same. The only difference is where the benefits are coming from. So one of the other requirements is that compensation must be equivalent. Equivalent doesn't mean exactly the same, it means substantially the same. So for example, equivalent is a total of 95% of regular earnings that would be paid during paid sick leave. So for example, if you had somebody with a broken leg, they would be paid all of their sick leave. If we are topping up EI benefits during the period the employee would have been paid sick leave, they were topping up to 95%. Equivalent during a period of STD equivalence is a total of 100% of the STD benefit. So as a result, equivalent equals EI maternity benefits plus sub-plan benefits to either 95 or 100%, depending on what the equivalent needs to be. The other basic principle of the subplan is that the sick leave bank is frozen during the period of subplan top-up. So employers are not allowed to reduce the sick bank while they are paying subplan top-up. And there can be no gap in benefits. So for example, you might have somebody who delivers midweek. EI benefits don't start until the following Sunday, for example. There's a 3 or 4 day gap in there. There's a couple of choices for employers. You either can pay that from the subplan, or you could actually fill in that gap with sick leave, for example, if it's available. Okay, so now we're going to get into the history of subplans. So the first one was Brooks versus Safeway. It was initially filed with the Manitoba Human Rights Commission in 1982. This employee alleged discrimination on the basis of sex. And what the Safeway short-term disability plan did at that time was it excluded coverage for pregnant employee for a certain period of time, even if their disability was not related to the pregnancy. So it was quite a significant period as well. It was, I think, 10 weeks before the anticipated date of delivery and 12 weeks after, or something like that. So of course the complaint was filed. It was heard by the Human Rights Tribunal and the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench. Both of those dismissed it. So it went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. In 1989, the Supreme Court of Canada rendered a decision, and what they said was that the Safeway short-term disability plan was discriminatory on the basis of sex, and pregnancy is a valid health-related reason for being absent from work. So shortly after the Safeway decision, Susan Parcells out of the Red Deer Regional Hospital filed a complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And she alleged discrimination on the basis of gender. And she did that because her employer required her to pay 100% of benefit plan premiums while on her maternity leave. So when the Board of Inquiry was actually looking at her complaint, they also decided at that time they were going to address some broader issues related to society on a broad basis, and also tried to clarify the Brooks versus Safeway decision. And what happened is that the Brooks versus Safeway decision came out. Employers didn't get all over it right away, so when the Parcells one came along, this was in Alberta, so they decided they're going to try and settle it once and for all. The Board of Inquiry decision came down on June 19th, 1991. And what the Board of Inquiry found, and again, because they were trying to address the broader issue of pregnancy and childbirth and cost to society and those kinds of things, what they found is that the premium cost share should be the same for an employee away for any medical reason. So if an employee was away for a broken leg, they would either have their premium cost shared if they were on sick leave or salary continuance, or it would be waived if they were on STD. The other point the Board of Inquiry found was that the valid health-related period must be compensated the same. So really what they were saying there is that the valid health-related period needed to be treated substantially the same. So again, what that means is that this is where the equivalence comes from. We're going to the compensation that the employee receives during the valid health-related period needs to be pretty close to what the employee would receive had they had a broken leg, with a little bit of leeway in there. The Board of Inquiry also found that the subplan can be used because society must share costs. So this is where they were saying that because childbirth benefited society as a whole, society should bear some of the costs, and as a result, employers could use a subplan to sort of offset the costs that they were going to incur. And this is where the Board of Inquiry also determined that maternity leave can be both voluntary and health related. So as we talked before, there's two portions to the leave. It's partly voluntary and part health related. And of course, those two periods are going to be treated differently. The other piece that came out of the inquiry decision was that the health related period is not a set presumptive period. So that means no one woman is the same. In terms of her pregnancy, The valid health-related period really is the period that the employee's physician says is the valid health-related period. Over time, of course, there have been some common guidelines that have come out. Normally, it's either a 6-week or 8-week recovery period, but sometimes it can be longer depending on the history of the employee. So in healthcare, of course, subplans continue to evolve. So when the subplan was first put in for healthcare, it applied both pre-delivery and post-delivery. In 2000 and 1999, the unions began to submit grievances, both policy and individual grievances. Most of them came from UNA and Health Sciences. And what happened as a result is that in order to settle those grievances, the healthcare industry, through a working group that looked at the whole issue, decided that the subplan would be applied post-delivery only. So starting in December 2000, healthcare employers were required to apply the subplan post-delivery only. So same principles, except now you treated the pre-delivery period and the post-delivery period a little bit differently. And I should say that there were a few things that came along after the Parcells decision, and there were some appeals, and there were a few other little cases that came along, but really it did not change the subplan substantially as a result. To be eligible for a subplan top-up, an employee must be eligible for paid sick leave, salary continuance, and or STD benefits. So, for example, if the employee would normally not be eligible for any compensation from any of these types of programs, then there is no subplan top-up. So, for example, if you look at a casual employee, they don't have any of those benefits. So, if a casual employee became pregnant, delivered a baby, and had a valid health-related period, there's nothing to pay, because if this same casual employee had a broken leg, for example, you wouldn't pay them for that either. The employee also must be in receipt of EI maternity benefits and provide proof that they are in receipt of EI maternity benefits. If the employee is not eligible for EI maternity benefits, and I'm not talking about those employees who actually refuse to apply for them, although I don't think that happens very often, but is eligible for paid sick leave or salary continuance or STD, the employee is still compensated to the equivalent level from the subplan. So in some cases, for example, if you have somebody who maybe had 2 maternity leaves back to back, didn't have any hours, so of course didn't qualify for EI again, in this case, the subplan would need to pick up the whole cost, because there would be no EI mat benefits to offset. And the employee, of course, must have a valid health-related reason for being off work following the delivery, and that's where the subplan claim comes in, and that's where the physician has to outline what the employee's valid health-related period is. Okay, so we're going to talk about the top-up amount. Okay, so if we're talking about somebody who normally would receive sick leave, so for example, if they had a broken leg and they had lots of sick leave in their sick leave bank, you have somebody who's got their valid health-related period. This would be to the sick leave equivalent, because normally they would be paid sick leave for that period of time. The total amount that the employee is going to be paid is 55%, of course, of their EI maternity benefits, plus 40% of their regular earnings as a subplan top-up to equal the 95%. So again, we're talking about equivalency here. If, when the employee had her valid health-related period, when it began, and she either was on STD before she delivered, or she does not have any sick leave left in her sick leave bank, then what the top-up amount would be 11 2/3% of her regular earnings. So that would be 55% of EI maternity and 11 2/3 of subplan to equal 100% of what she would receive had she been in receipt of STD benefits. And this is where we say if there is no employment EI benefits payable, so for example, if the employee didn't qualify because she had 2 leaves back to back, for example, if normally she would have been paid sick leave, then of course the subplan is going to pay 95% of her regular earnings. If there is no sick leave, then of course it's going to be the STD equivalent, assuming she has access to an STD equivalent plan, and that would be 66 2/3 of her regular earnings. So during the valid health-related period, though, there can be both a period of sick leave equivalent and STD equivalent. So For example, let's say that somebody's valid health-related period is 6 weeks, and let's say that she had 2 weeks of sick leave in her bank. So for the first 2 weeks of her valid health-related period post-delivery, the top-up is going to be 95%, which would be the sick leave equivalent. And after that, for the first 2 weeks is going to be 95%. Then for the last 4 weeks of her valid health-related period, the top-up is going to equal what she would have received on STD. So her total income will be 66 2/3. And this is exactly what would have happened if this person would have had a broken leg. We would have exhausted sick leave, which would have been the 2 weeks. And then if this person was still off for the next 4 weeks, then of course this person would have been entitled to apply for short-term disability and presumably be accepted and receive STD benefits. Okay, so how long does the subplan top up? Okay, so the top-up is paid until the earlier of the date the valid health-related period post-delivery ends, or 15 weeks. And the 15 weeks, of course, is attached to the maximum length of time that EI benefits are payable. So EI maternity benefits are payable for a maximum of 15 weeks. EI can begin as early as 12 weeks before and end up to 17 weeks after the actual date of birth. And of course, the maximum amount of EI benefits for 2018 is $547 a week. And everybody should be aware that EI changes annually. So of course, the number for 2019 is going to look different come January 1, 2019. Okay, so I'm going to talk about process a little bit. When your employee tells you she is pregnant, or you find out that somebody in your organization is pregnant, what you really should be doing is ask for an anticipated date of delivery and anticipated maternity leave dates. And the reason you're doing that is you just kind of want to prepare for when the event actually happens. So once you kind of know when all of this is going to happen, then prior to the date of delivery or the maternity leave start date, somebody should be contacting the employee and confirming the dates if possible. The employee should be provided with a subplan claim form, costing sheet, and information guide. And this is the leave of absence costing sheet that we're talking about. So again, we talk about when there's a maternity leave, there's the valid health-related period, and then there's voluntary period. And of course, the cost share for benefits is different from them. So when you're doing the costing for the voluntary portion of the mat leave, of course, you're going to be asking the employee which benefits they want to continue, or you're going to be giving them the cost for the remainder of the mat leave, what it's going to be costing them, and then they need to decide prior to their mat leave which benefits they need to continue and make arrangements with you for payment. In the HBTA manual, of course, there's a maternity leave subplan checklist. Now, I know it's very detailed, but it certainly does outline every step of the process that you need to follow. Okay, so when the employee's maternity leave begins, or just prior to the date that it begins, you issue a record of employment. You ask the employee for the completed benefits during a coverage leave of absence form. So this is the form that's going to tell you which benefits they are going to continue or discontinue. And of course, we are in the midst of transferring all employers onto the Blue Cross Online Administration tool. So what that means for those employers who are already on it is you move the employee to the appropriate section depending on the benefits continued or discontinued. And what this means on the Blue Cross Administration tool is that might mean a new section number. So if you don't know which section number that is, you can contact hbtabenefits.ca. Okay, so we're going to talk about what happens pre-delivery. So as we all know, you're going to have some employees who are going to be working until their date of delivery. There are going to be some employees who are going to go off early because they want to. There are going to be some employees who go off early because they must. So they have a medical reason for not working. So if the employee is unable to work prior to her date of delivery, she must substantiate the reason for being absent from work, just as you would for anybody else, right? So somebody says they can't come back to work because they're sick, then of course you're looking for some sort of a doctor's note or whatever it is you normally would accept from employer in order to be able to pay sick leave or give them the application for STD if that's required. So again, if you've got somebody who is unable to work because of a medical reason, you start to pay her sick leave. If she doesn't have a whole lot of sick leave in her bank, then you're also going to be watching that as well so that you can send her an STD claim form so that she can get that submitted to Great West Life in time so there isn't any gap in her benefits. So you would do the same thing for anybody else with a broken leg. You would watch how much sick leave they have. If you know that they're going to be away for 6 weeks and there's only 2 weeks of paid sick leave, then you're going to be providing an STD claim form right away anyway. So once the employee is approved for STD benefits or salary continuance, and again, when I talk about paid sick leave, I know that some employers have salary continuance, but it's the same principles normally apply. So the employee continues to receive her sick leave or salary continuance until it's exhausted, and if she still has not delivered, still cannot return to work, then of course there's going to be STD payable as well. If an employee has exhausted their sick leave or salary continuance and there is no STD plan, then of course there's going to be a gap in payment. And this is all pre-delivery, so this means that the employee can apply for EI sickness benefits but there will not be any benefit payable from the employer. All right. So what happens on date of delivery? On the date of delivery, the valid health-related period begins. The valid health-related period is as long as the employee's physician and midwife indicates. So I just want to mention the midwife here. So when you look at the current subplan claim form, it just asks for a physician's signature. We are changing that now because Great West Life will accept information from a midwife as well. And as we know, there are several people who would prefer to deliver with a midwife present. And again, as I said before, it is as long as the physician or midwife indicates, because remember we said at the very beginning that there is not a set presumptive period for anybody. Everybody is individual. So although the 6 weeks and 8 weeks post-delivery are common, if the physician or midwife feels that the employee needs to have more time to recover from the childbirth, of course, that's what they're going to indicate. And what Great West Life will do is if it's out of the norms, then they will probably be looking for a little bit more information. And starting on the date of delivery and after, the employer receives a combination of EI maternity and subplan benefits. And again, during the valid health-related period up to a maximum of 15 weeks. Okay, so we're going to talk about some examples. So we're going to talk about what the top-up looks like to the sick leave equivalent period. So let's say the employee's regular earnings are $1,000. What needs to happen is that for the subplan top-up, we need to come up with 95% of regular earnings. So that would be $950, which is 95% of 1,000. We're assuming at this point in time the employee is receiving the maximum EI maternity benefit, which is $547. So if you take 950 minus 547, then the subplan benefit is $403. So that's the amount that this employee would receive during her valid health-related period, assuming the whole valid health-related period is topped up to her sick leave equivalent. Okay, so what does it look like when we're doing STD equivalent? So again, the benefits are weekly, so we're going to assume that this employee has regular earnings of $1,000. So what we need to do is we need to calculate the amount of STD benefit that she would receive. So this would be $666.70. We know that her EI maternity benefit is going to be $547. So to make up the difference, the subplan benefit needs to be $119.70. So $547 and $119.70 equals $666.70, which is the amount she would have received on her subplan. Okay, so there may be a gap between the date of delivery and when EI benefits begin, and there's also the waiting period, which I haven't really talked about. But so let's say that let's say that the employee delivered midweek, And so her EI maternity benefits, if she already isn't starting to receive them, because she can start to receive them prior to her date of delivery if she wishes. Let's say that her EI maternity benefits don't begin until the following Sunday. So there is the remainder of the week that needs to be covered. There should not be a gap. So if this employee has sick leave, then you pay sick leave if available. If she does not have any sick leave, then you're looking at the STD equivalent. And the only obligation that the employer there is to the employer when you're trying to fill the gap is that you pay for the scheduled shifts only. So if, for example, I'm a part-time employee and I delivered on Wednesday and I didn't have any scheduled shifts until the following week, there's nothing there to be paid. But if I delivered on Wednesday and I had a shift on Thursday and Friday, then the gap is the Thursday and Friday income that I would have received. And so the employer needs to cover that as best they can. Okay, I'm going to talk about LAP for a second. So even in the beginning of time and currently now, periods of subplan top-up are viewed by the local authorities pension plan as leaves with partial pay. So what that really means is that full LAP contributions continue during the valid health-related period. And that's, of course, for us as post-delivery. So what that also really means is that the employer must remit both the employee and employer portions and then later collect the employee portion from the employee, either while they're on their leave or while they are or when they return from their leave. So this is actually the only time that an employee and receiver of a subplan benefit is actually maybe better off than anybody else, because this is a valid health-related period. There's a couple of things. The benefits must stay in effect, and LAP also stays in effect for those employers that participate in the LAP, whereas normally it would be viewed as a leave of absence, and if you want to purchase that service, you do it through the leave of absence process. Okay, so we're going to talk about the benefit premium cost share. Okay, so during the valid health-related period, if the subplan is topping up to the sick leave equivalent period, then which is the total of 95% of regular earnings, then the normal cost share applies. So this is the same thing that would happen if somebody had a broken leg, for example. They would be receiving sick leave and the normal cost share would apply. So we're treating them virtually the same. If it's the STD equivalent period, then the general waiver premium applies. And again, just to take this back to the person with the broken leg. So if the person with the broken leg didn't have any sick leave, then of course they would apply for STD, and assuming that the STD was approved and payable, they would be on waiver premium. So the same thing with somebody who would be in the STD equivalent period during their valid health related period. And again, if we go back to the person that had 2 weeks of sick leave, their valid health related period was a total of 6 weeks. During the first 2 weeks of the valid health related period, the cost share would continue, and then for the last 4 weeks, because we're talking about STD equivalent, there would be a waiver of premium. So that means that the employee is not charged for any of the premium for the benefits that are in effect. So after the valid health related period is over, then normal leave of absence provision applied. So for those benefits that the employee decided she wanted to keep during the voluntary period of her leave of absence, of course she is paying 100% of the premium for those. So, and if you go back to the example I gave before, where somebody actually went off work early just because she wanted to, so there was no reason for her doing that. So potentially you would have the first month, for example, if you go back to my example, the first month would be a voluntary leave. So what that means that for the benefits that the employee wanted to keep for that first month, they have to pay 100%. Then the valid health related period comes along, so you're messing around with the cost share depending on what's going to happen. And then once the valid health related period is over, then of course the employee is responsible for 100% of the premium again. So it can get labor intensive and complicated. So there is also a period of time when the employee's EI maternity benefits actually might be greater than what we're calling the equivalent or equivalent benefit. So, and the reason that happens is that because there's a difference between EI insurable earnings and regular earnings. Because of course, everything we do under the benefit plan is based on regular earnings. And of course, EI is insurable earnings, so there's a difference there. So this is most likely to happen when you've got somebody who's a part-time employee, and for some reason she's working a lot of extra hours prior to the pregnancy or prior to her date of delivery. So what that means, for example, potentially EI insurable earnings could be based on a full-time FTE earnings, and really regular earnings for this employee is maybe based on a 0.4. So you can see where that difference can come in, and really in this case, it's possible that the EI insurable earnings or the EI maternity benefits are going to be greater than what we normally needed. She would have been receiving anyway. So regardless if that happens, you would still treat this person like you would if you were paying the subplan top-up. So for example, if we're talking again about the sick leave equivalent period, then the normal cost share would apply. And if we're talking about an STD equivalent period, then the premium would be waived. And this is always easier said than done because, of course, in this case, you're not paying the employee anything. You're going to be collecting premiums after the fact for sure, unless you can convince them to pay something earlier. I don't think it happens very often, but I know that it does happen. Okay, so we're just going to talk about process a little bit. So first of all, your employee must tell you when she has delivered. And the reason that she must do this is so that you would know what you need to do at your end. So she tells you when she has delivered. Presumably you have already given her the claim form. So when she's at the hospital, she's got the claim form with her, and her physician, or if she's at home, her midwife can complete the claim form and submit it to Great West Life. If the valid health related is within normal recovery times, Great West Life will just issue the payment to the employee. So what we mean by normal recovery times is if it's a vaginal birth, normally it's about 6 weeks. If it's a cesarean, normally it's about 8 weeks. There are some that are outside of that, but this is the norm. Because the claim form is going in directly to Great West Life, what we have asked Great West Life to do is to notify the employer of the approved sub-claim period, because you're not going to know what the valid health-related period is, because if the claim form goes in directly to Great West Life, of course you're not going to see that. You're not going to know if it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or if it's longer than that. So Great West Life needs to tell you that. And again, we asked Great West Life to do that because employers are being blindsided because they didn't know when the valid health-related period was over. When Great West Life approves or pays a subplan claim form, they're going to issue an invoice to the employer for payment. Of course, it's issued under plan number 55,000. And just as a note, if it's paid late, Great West Life is going to charge some interest. So, and again, knowing when the valid health-related period is over or going to end is important, and we need Great West Life to tell our employers that ahead of time, because of course you're going to be looking at benefit plan premium cost share changes. So the other reason that you want your employee to tell you when she has delivered is because there's a new dependent. And if the employee has prepaid their benefits, of course, during their leave, they should be adding the new dependent immediately. If they have not prepaid their benefits during the leave, they can tell you that they want to add their dependent, or you ask them to do that when they return from their leave if they discontinued benefits. The other important reason is that if this is a first dependent, of course, then premiums are going to change from single premiums to family premiums. And when you're doing your LOA costing, I know that some employers charge family premiums for the voluntary portion because, of course, they know that there's going to be a dependent, so you assume this family coverage, which you should anyway. And some employers I know cost it at single, and then they reconcile everything when the employee comes back. It's much easier probably to charge family premiums up front, but again, some employers choose not to do that. The other reason why this is good practice is because An employee might forget to add the new dependent. They might, for some reason, think that the dependent is added automatically. Sometimes there are issues with the child, and then the employee is trying to submit a claim, and of course the child's not there, so then they run into some issues. So it's nice if you can get your employees to kind of do this in a timely manner. So what does the employer have to do when the employee returns to work? If the employee did not continue their benefits during the voluntary portion of their leave, if they're back at work, they're actively at work, there are no issues, then you reinstate the benefits they had prior to the leave or the benefits they had during their valid health-related period. If the employee cannot return from their mat leave and they have not prepaid benefits, you cannot enroll them in benefits until they are actively at work because there has been a gap in coverage. So lots of times they don't come back to work, they're eligible for sick leave, and that often will just automatically reinstate the benefits. You have to stop it because the employee is not actively at work. They cannot be enrolled in benefits again. And they can be enrolled in benefits until they actually are actively at work. And what we mean by actively at work is full duties, full hours, and clearance that they can come back to work and do their full duties and hours. If the employee continue her benefits during the voluntary portion of her leave, then all you really need to do is change the cost share. So go back to the normal cost share. For those employers who are on the Alberta Blue Cross online administration tool, then you move the employee from one section to another. So then you move them back to the regular cost share section for benefits. So that when Blue Cross issues the invoice, they know that this person is back on cost share.